In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use a digital projector to transport your subject to an entirely different world, all in the comfort of your studio. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. With my style, I shoot very clean, bold, graphic images on seamless paper backgrounds. That's my go-to. But every once in a while, you want something that feels a little bit more fantasy. You want to feel inspired by shooting on location. But shooting on location has its own challenges, whether it's logistical or gear or financial. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to transport our subject to an entirely new environment right here in my studio using a digital projector. I've been doing this technique a lot recently because I've been finding it so inspiring. So what I want to do is I want to take you through the process of everything from creating my background to adding light to make it look believable that my subject's actually in that scene. Now, I actually wanted to mention that as well. I'm not a photographer that likes to just composite things together after the fact. I love to see it in real time because it changes how I light, changes the color of the light, the way I blend things together. And that's why I found a digital projector to be such an inspiring tool. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to put the subject in this beautiful Art Deco environment. And I created this with an AI tool called Midjourney. Midjourney is a text-to-image generator. And what that means is I can type in any prompt or inspiration I have and it'll create an image for me. Now what I usually do is I try to start with something in reality. For example, for this shot, I was inspired by the subject's clothing. It felt kind of Art Deco in the pattern. I loved the gold. And so when I created the background, it was inspired by the look. And so let's actually pop over to Midjourney and I'll show you what it looks like. Here's the prompt I gave it. Abstract version of Metropolis movie, interior architecture as a photographic background, Art Deco, spotlights with beams, color gold in cinematic. And I love the result it gave me. So the next thing I need to do is once I create that environment, I need to project it onto the background. Now I've found that projecting onto a white background is going to be the best because it allows the projection to look its brightest. Now the tool that I'm using here is a digital projector, but I recommend using at least 3000 lumens. The one that we're using is 5500 lumens, and that basically is how bright is this projector. It is going to be the weakest light in your scene, so whatever you can find for the most output is going to be the best. Of course, you can use a home movie projector that you already have. You can rent these tools, but brighter is better as well as higher resolution. Okay, so what I'm going to do is today I'm going to be shooting with the Canon R5 Mark II and the Canon 24 to 105 2.8 lens. I'm going to set it to exposure simulation so I can actually see the exposure in real time, and I'm going to base the entire image's exposure off of the background to begin with, and then I'll layer on my other lights later. So let's get our base exposure. So let's talk about my camera settings. First of all, I'm shooting at ISO 800. The projector is relatively low power, so I want to make sure I get the correct exposure. Next up is my aperture. I am shooting at f2.8. I'm doing this for a couple reasons. First of all, when I blur out the background, that fall off of focus makes it look a little bit more believable, like she's actually on location. And then if the background is low resolution or doesn't look real, well, if it's out of focus, it's going to be just a little bit more believable. And then last but not least, I'm shooting at a shutter speed of 1/80th of a second. Now, typically, I think this would be a little bit too slow of a shutter speed for doing a portrait, but I know that I'm going to be adding a strobe to illuminate my subject, and that's going to freeze her in place. Now, for this setup, you can use strobes or continuous lights. Sometimes working with continuous light might actually be easier to make the scene look more believable. For example, you can dial in the exact color temperature that you want to match the environment. You can see it in real time. However, in this instance, we are going to be using strobes. So let's actually begin with the first light to the right-hand side of the scene. I'm going to be adding a Profoto D2 with the Westcott Optical Spot. Now the goal of this first light is I'm going to illuminate the subject's face. That is just to make sure she has some light, but the other lights I add later on are going to help unify her with the environment. So this one is just to give me a pocket of light on the face. This is one of my favorite modifiers. I use this all the time because of the control that it gives me. Now this background feels very cinematic, very dramatic, so I wanted to create a tight beam of light like she's stepping into light coming in through a doorway. And that's exactly what I'm getting out of this modifier. By the way, in the link in the description below, I've added several other videos that talk about how I use an optical spot in case this tool is new to you. All right, so as I look at this image, there's a couple things that I think make her look separated from the environment. First of all, the color doesn't quite match. I think the background looks much warmer than the light on her, but that's something we can do in color grading. And then last but not least, there's all this beautiful, glowing, warm light behind her, but there's nothing on her. So that's where we're going to come into play with 2 rim lights. On either side of the background, we are using 1 by 4 foot strip softboxes with grids. Now these are going to give her nice rim lights on both sides of her hair. The grids are really important because I want to control the spread of light. I don't want the light to hit the background. And on these 2 lights, we've used orange gels. The orange gels are going to be really important to help unify her with the background. It will look like the light behind her is actually wrapping around her. So let's add those 2 background lights. Already, this looks a lot more believable. And by the way, I just wanted to give you one word of caution if you were trying this at home. If you are working with strobes that have modeling lights on, because you are using such a slow shutter speed and such a high ISO and a wide aperture, your modeling lights might actually be contributing to the exposure. So for example, with our main light, we have the modeling light turned way down. You might even want to turn it off so that I can balance it with the exposure of the projection on the background. So just something to watch out for. Okay, so let's pivot back to our photo here. I think the light is looking much better, but again, the color doesn't quite match. So that's where I'm gonna start doing a little bit more of my color grading. I'm going to warm up the image overall. And so rather than shooting at 5600 Kelvin, which is my usual go-to with strobes, I'm shooting more at 8500. So see how much warmer it gets. Then what I wanna do is maybe add a little more contrast. So next up, I'm going to go down to my color balance. And what I'm going to try to do is unify the hues of the subject and the background. So this is a trick that sometimes I've used in compositing. But basically, if you add a certain color to the highlights and another color to the shadows, if those are the same on the subject and the background, it tricks our brain into thinking they must be in the same scene. Let's go into my highlights, and I'm going to warm them up even more to go a little bit orange. Then maybe in my shadows, I'll make them a little bit more magenta. So you can see how the background and subject have a similar distribution of color. So here's without the color grading and with color grading, looking better already. But you know what helps make something look even more believable? Sometimes a specialty filter. So what I'm going to add into this scene is a black pro mist. This is the black pro mist 1 strength. And what it does is it takes highlights in the scene, in the background, on the subjects, and it makes them glow a little bit. So if you see glowing highlights in the background, it's going to make you believe that there's probably a light source back there. Now the 1 strength is pretty strong, so we'll likely have to go back in and tweak a little bit more of my contrast and clarity. So let's see what the black pro mist is adding to this scene. So this is without the black pro mist, and here is with. I definitely need to add a little bit more contrast, but look at how the background is just glowing and even wrapping around her. I think that this is giving me all of the ingredients I need to kind of sell this story, to make it look like she's on location. Can you imagine going to a location like this? How complicated it would be to get the right time of day, get permission to shoot there. And now I've been able to create it in my studio. So I've got the subject styling right, I've got the color in the scene right, I've got the color grading right, the filter, all of those things together. And now it's time to create the mood. Maybe certain expressions or movements will make it feel more cinematic, like the subject is actually in that location. So I've got all the core ingredients. Let's get the shot. These images are so cinematic, so dramatic, so beautiful, and the environment she's shooting in looks stunning, even though it's just created by a digital projector. So you can see why this sort of thing has been inspiring me a lot recently. Now, speaking of, if you'd like to see some more setups that I've done with continuous light and a digital projector, be sure to check the links in the description below. I have released the continuous lighting guide bundle, and there's more than 70 setups with everything you need to recreate them, from behind the scenes to measurements to gear guide and more. Now, if you want to see the gear that I use to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below, and of course, visit adorama.com. And by the way, I'm constantly pushing myself to explore, experiment, find new techniques, and then when I do, I pass them on to you. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more of my experimental techniques. All right, everybody, see you next time.